Part 7, Chapter 7. The Decision. The core pulsed again. Thump. The entire cavern shuddered. The sound was deeper here, heavier than anything they had heard before, as if the mountain itself had grown a heartbeat. The massive sphere of living tissue rose and fell slowly in the center of the chamber. Veins as thick as tree trunks pulsed through its surface. Every beat sent waves of movement across the fleshy walls surrounding them. Hamilton wiped sweat from his forehead. It's getting bigger. Stephen nodded. Yes. Isaac knelt beside the metal case and carefully removed the glass vials. Each one glowed faintly in the lantern light. The serum, the same compound he had once believed could defeat disease, defeat death. Now it was the only weapon they had left. Sarah watched him. You're certain this will work? Isaac didn't answer immediately. He loaded the first vial into the metal injector, tightening the mechanism with steady hands. It should. Hamilton raised an eyebrow. Should. Isaac glanced up at him. The serum forces rapid cellular division. Stephen finished the thought. If the growth becomes uncontrolled, the organism will collapse under its own mass. Hamilton looked at the core again. The thing was enormous and still growing. So we're going to give the giant underground brain tumor the worst cancer it's ever had. Stephen nodded. Yes. Hamilton took a slow breath. Well, he lifted the revolver slightly. I've had worse plans. Another pulse shook the cavern. This one harder. The walls shifted around them. A long crack opened across the floor before sealing again with a wet sound. Sarah stepped back slightly. It's reacting. Stephen looked toward the core. No. He spoke quietly. It's aware. The pulse came again, stronger. The organism had begun responding to their presence. Veins across the cavern walls twitched. Movement traveled through the tissue like signals racing through nerves. Isaac stood slowly. The injector now filled with the serum. There's one problem. Hamilton looked at him. Only one? Isaac gestured toward the core. That tissue is denser than anything I've studied. Stephen understood immediately. How deep does the injection need to go? Isaac's answer came softly. Directly into the center. Hamilton frowned. You can't throw it from here? Isaac shook his head. No. Stephen looked toward the beating mass again. The core stood nearly 15 feet high, the surface thick and layered, each pulse stronger than the last. Someone has to get close, Stephen said. Isaac nodded. Yes. Hamilton stepped forward. I'll do it. Isaac shook his head immediately. No. Hamilton blinked. Why not? Isaac held up the injector. This device requires precise placement, Stephen added quietly, and timing. Hamilton glanced between them. So teach me. Isaac shook his head again. You won't have enough time. The pulse came again. The cavern floor trembled violently this time. Loose fragments of rock fell from the ceiling. The organism was growing faster now. Stephen looked at Isaac. You already decided. Isaac did not deny it. Sarah stepped forward suddenly. No. Isaac looked at her. This started with me. Sarah's voice cracked. We can still figure out another way. Isaac shook his head gently. There isn't time. The pulse came again. Thump. The core swelled larger. Veins across the cavern walls stretched outward. Hamilton stepped closer. You don't know that. Isaac looked at him. Yes! He lifted the injector. The serum will destroy the organism. Stephen spoke quietly. But whoever injects it won't have time to escape. Isaac nodded. No. Silence filled the cavern. Even Hamilton had no response for that. Sarah's voice broke. There has to be another way. Isaac gave a small, sad smile. I spent my life trying to defeat death. He looked down at the injector in his hand, and all I did was make something worse. Another pulse struck the cavern. The floor lurched beneath them. The organism was growing faster now. Stephen stepped forward. I'll do it. Isaac looked up immediately. No. Stephen held his gaze. You don't get to decide that. Isaac shook his head firmly. Yes, I do. He looked at Stephen. You didn't create this. Stephen didn't answer. Isaac's voice softened. But I did. Another pulse rolled through the cavern. The core swelled larger. The organism was nearly awake now. Hamilton stepped closer to Stephen. Doc. Stephen looked at him. Hamilton shook his head slowly. He's right. Stephen closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, Isaac was already walking toward the core. The injector held steady in his hand. Sarah whispered behind him. Isaac! He stopped for just a moment, but he didn't turn around. I'm sorry. The core pulsed again. The massive living heart of the organism beating louder than ever. Isaac took another step forward, and the cavern trembled around him. Part 7, Chapter 8, Isaac's Redemption. The cavern trembled again. Dust drifted from the ceiling in thin grey curtains as the pulse rolled through the living chamber. Thump. The core swelled outward. Veins across its surface stretched and tightened like cables under pressure. Isaac walked slowly toward it, the injector steady in his hand. Behind him, Stephen, Hamilton and Sarah stood frozen. No one spoke. No one tried to stop him again. Because they all understood now. The organism had grown too large, too fast, and there was no other way to end it. The heat radiating from the core grew stronger with every step Isaac took. The air around it shimmered, like standing too close to a furnace. Hamilton muttered quietly, "Damn fool, scientist." But there was no anger in his voice, only respect. Sarah stepped forward slightly. "Isaac," he stopped again, just for a moment. The injector trembled faintly in his hand. Then he spoke, not turning around. "I remember the first day I saw it." Stephen listened. The pulse echoed through the cavern again. Isaac continued quietly. "It was small then, barely larger than my hand. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." Stephen lowered his head. Isaac took another step toward the core. "And I thought," his voice faltered, "if something like that could exist, maybe death didn't have to." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You were trying to help people." Isaac gave a faint, sad laugh. "Yes." Another pulse shook the cavern. The core bulged outward again, thicker, heavier. Isaac raised the injector slightly, but trying isn't always enough. Stephen spoke quietly behind him. "You don't have to do this." Isaac finally turned his head, not fully, just enough that Stephen could see his expression in the lantern light. Calm, resolved. "I do." The pulse came again. The cavern floor lurched. The organism had begun reacting violently now. The walls twitched. Long strands of tissue shifted through the air like nerves firing signals. Isaac looked toward the core again. "I spent my life trying to conquer death." He lifted the injector. "But life isn't meant to be conquered." Another step forward. The heat grew unbearable now. Steam rose from the damp cavern floor. Hamilton spoke quietly behind him. "You're a brave man, Isaac." Isaac smiled faintly. "No." He adjusted his grip on the injector. "I'm just correcting my mistake." The core pulsed again, harder. Isaac reached the surface of the massive living mass. Up close, it was worse than any of them had imagined. Layers of thick, muscle-like tissue flexed with every beat. Massive veins throbbed across its surface. Each pulse pushed warm air outward like breath. Isaac placed his hand against it. The surface moved beneath his palm, alive, aware. Stephen stepped forward instinctively. "Isaac!" Isaac raised his other hand slightly, stopping him. "This has to end." The pulse came again. Isaac lifted the injector. The long needle gleamed in the lantern light. He pressed it against the thick tissue. For a moment he hesitated, just long enough to remember. His father, the cabin in the woods, the promise he made on that quiet night. "I'll save them. I'll save all of them." He closed his eyes, then drove the needle deep into the core. The injector hissed. The serum flooded into the organism. For a single second, nothing happened. Then the core pulsed, harder, thump. The veins across its surface swelled violently. Isaac stepped back. The organism convulsed. Thump, thump. The cavern walls rippled outward. The serum had begun spreading through the network. Stephen shouted, "Run!" Hamilton grabbed Sarah's arm. "Move!" The core swelled again. Larger now, rapidly expanding. The organism had begun growing faster than its structure could handle. Isaac stood still, watching it. The veins across the cavern burst open. Fluid poured across the floor. The walls twisted violently. The mountain began collapsing. Stephen turned back once. "Isaac!" But Isaac was already disappearing behind the swelling mass of tissue. He looked at them one last time and smiled. Then the core exploded outward, and the cavern began to collapse. Part 7, Chapter 9, Collapse of the Living Mountain. The explosion of growth came first, then the screaming of the mountain. The core convulsed like a dying heart, swelling far beyond its natural limits as Isaac's serum ripped through the organism's veins. Tissue burst outward in thick waves, veins stretched until they snapped. The cavern walls rippled violently as the entire biological network began devouring itself. Stephen grabbed Sarah's arm. "Move!" Hamilton was already running. The ground split beneath their feet as the cavern shook like a collapsing lung. Thick strands of living tissue tore loose from the walls and dropped across the floor in writhing coils. Behind them, the core expanded again. Larger, faster. Then it ruptured. A deafening wet crack echoed through the chamber as the organism tore itself open. Stephen felt a blast of hot air slam into his back. The entire cavern lurched. "Run!" Hamilton shouted again. They sprinted down the tunnel. The pulse beneath the mountain had changed. No longer steady. Now it was chaotic, violent, uncontrolled. The organism was growing too fast, far too fast. The serum had turned its own strength against it. Behind them, the cavern collapsed. Walls burst outward as the expanding tissue crushed the surrounding stone. Chunks of rock fell from the ceiling, smashing against the floor as the tunnel began folding in on itself. Sarah stumbled. Hamilton caught her arm. "Don't stop!" The ground buckled again. Stephen glanced back once. The tunnel behind them was filling with thick masses of pale flesh as the organism expanded outward in a final catastrophic surge. It was eating itself alive. The serum was working, but it was also destroying the entire underground system. The tunnel ahead cracked open as another tremor ripped through the mountain. Hamilton cursed. "Whole damn hill's coming down!" Stephen pointed ahead. "Keep moving." The exit light appeared in the distance, faint, small, but growing larger with every step. Behind them, a thunderous collapse rolled through the mountain. The cavern ceiling gave way. A tidal wave of stone and flesh crashed through the tunnels, chasing them toward the surface. Hamilton burst out of the cave first. Cold night air hit his lungs as he stumbled onto the rocky slope outside. Stephen and Sarah followed seconds later. They barely had time to turn around before the entire cave entrance imploded. The mountain roared. Rock poured down the slope like a landslide as the tunnel sealed shut beneath tons of collapsing stone. The ground shook violently. Hamilton grabbed Sarah and pulled her farther down the hillside. Stephen watched as the mountain continued to collapse inward. The organism inside was tearing itself apart. The serum had forced every cell into uncontrolled growth. The network beneath the earth had become too large to survive. Stone cracked, dust rose into the night sky. The mountain shuddered one final time. Then everything went still. Silence fell across the forest. Hamilton slowly lowered his revolver. The lake in the distance had stopped moving. Its surface lay perfectly still under the moonlight. Stephen stared at the collapsed mountain. Isaac was still inside, buried beneath thousands of tons of rock and dying tissue. Sarah stepped forward slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Is it over?" Stephen looked toward the lake. The water no longer breathed. The pulses had stopped. The ground beneath their feet was quiet again. He nodded. "Yes." Hamilton exhaled slowly. "Well," he looked back at the mountain, "that man just saved the whole damn world." No one answered, because there was nothing left to say. Far beneath the collapsed mountain, the organism continued tearing itself apart, and Isaac Tesla died with it. Part 7, Chapter 10, The Return. The town of Folklore did not celebrate. Not at first. For 3 days the people waited. They watched the lake. They listened to the ground. Every creak of wood, every distant rumble of stone made hearts stop and eyes turn toward the mountain. But the pulse never returned. The lake no longer breathed. The earth remained still. Whatever had lived beneath the mountain was gone. The mountain itself had changed. The cave entrance no longer existed. Where the tunnel once opened into darkness, there was now only a collapsed wall of stone and earth, sealed forever beneath the weight of the mountain above it. Isaac Tesla had been buried there, along with the organism he had helped awaken. A small service was held near the edge of town. No coffin, no body. Only a marker placed at the edge of the forest where the mountain could still be seen through the trees. Hamilton stood with his hat in his hands. Sarah stood beside him, silent. Stephen stood slightly apart from the others, watching the wind move through the trees. The sheriff spoke a few words. Most of the town simply bowed their heads. When it was finished, Hamilton stepped forward and placed Isaac's tools at the base of the marker. A wrench, a small brass gear, a cracked magnifying lens. He stood there for a long moment before speaking quietly. "Hell of a mind you had, son." Then he stepped away. Days passed. Slowly, the town began to breathe again. Boats returned to the lake. Children played in the streets. The tremors were gone. The strange illnesses had stopped spreading. Life continued, but nothing felt the same. Stephen spent most of his time in the laboratory. packing, writing, studying the notes Isaac had left behind. Isaac's notebook lay open across the desk, pages filled with sketches of biological systems and half-finished formulas, ideas that could change medicine forever, ideas that could destroy the world if used the wrong way. Stephen closed the notebook. Some knowledge was not meant to be finished. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains. Stephen walked slowly through the town, past the docks, past the quiet lake, past the streets where he had first arrived. He stopped at the well, the same stone well he had fallen through weeks ago, the place where his life had changed. Hamilton approached from the road. "You really think that thing's still working?" Stephen looked down into the dark water. "I don't know." Hamilton nodded toward the town behind them. "Well," he adjusted his hat, "you saved us." Stephen shook his head. "No." He looked toward the mountain. Isaac did. Hamilton followed his gaze. For a long moment neither man spoke. Then Hamilton sighed. "If that hole sends you home," he extended his hand, "don't forget this place." Stephen shook it. "I won't." Sarah approached quietly from the path. She carried Isaac's notebook. She handed it to Stephen. "He wanted you to have it." Stephen took the book slowly. The weight of it felt heavier than it should. "Thank you." Sarah gave a small nod. "You changed this town." Stephen looked toward the lake again. "No," he said softly, "this town changed me." The sky had grown dark. Stars had begun appearing overhead. Stephen stepped closer to the well. The water below was perfectly still. He took one last look at the town. The quiet streets, the lantern lights glowing in windows, the people who had become his friends, Hamilton, Sarah, the place that had nearly destroyed the world, and the man who had saved it. Stephen climbed onto the stone edge. Hamilton gave him a small nod. "Good luck, Doc." Stephen held Isaac's notebook against his chest. Then he stepped forward. The darkness swallowed him. For a moment there was only falling. Cold, silence, then light. Stephen gasped. Bright fluorescent lights burned overhead. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Voices echoed around him. Hospital voices. Real voices. A nurse screamed. "Dr. Woods!" Hands grabbed his shoulders. Machines beeped. People rushed toward him. Stephen lay on the hospital floor, breathing hard as familiar walls surrounded him. Months had passed. He could see it in their faces, in the exhaustion of the doctors who had searched for him, in the disbelief in their eyes. "You disappeared," someone said. Stephen didn't answer. He was staring at the notebook still clutched in his hand. Isaac's notebook. Proof that it had all been real. Later that night, Stephen sat alone in his office. The hospital had grown quiet. The world outside the window was peaceful. Normal. He opened the notebook again. The final page contained a line Isaac had written in hurried ink. Stephen read it slowly. "If life grows everywhere in the universe, how can we be sure we killed the only one?" Stephen closed the book. For a long time he sat there in silence. The world felt different now. Larger, stranger, more alive than he had ever imagined. Finally he stood and walked to the window. The city lights stretched across the night. Somewhere beneath the earth lay secrets older than humanity itself. Stephen whispered softly to the empty room. "Rest now, Isaac." And far beneath the quiet world above, something deep in the earth shifted once, then went still. The end.